intimidating personality,
I'm not.
but
Well, as for me, I know nothing but the fact of my own ignorance.
there you go. How Socratic. Welcome, everyone, to the JLSM book study. John Lavinia here with you. It's Monday, the 9th of May, 2022. Today, we're concluding our study of The Gap and the Gain by Benjamin Hardy with excerpts from Dan Sullivan. So here we go. We do have Glenn, who's usually not here with us on a Monday night. We do have Bob and Missy and Stuart, and I'm sure we're going to have Lindsay and Linda and a few others tuning in here any
No,
moment.
they can't.
Yeah.
Lindsay's
No?
on a plane. And
Lindsay's on a
walking.
plane?
Lindsay's walking to the bone so she can go to the middle.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, she's heading back from Chicago. Anyway, tonight's our conclusion of The Gap and the Gain, the final two chapters. Although Glenn is here with us, and he said that he went through the whole book today. So
I must confess, I stand corrected. The book that I went through today was announced as the next book in our book study series.
Oh,
Okay.
so
Yes.
so you did not read The Gap and the Gain.
I've not read The Gap and the Gain, so I shall listen
So
intently.
you just
this
read The
evening.
Traveler's Gift, and it was so compelling that you got through the whole thing in one day.
Correct.
Now I understand. Missy, now I understand. Glenn was like, man, I got so much out of this book. I am inspired. I'm like, well, great. That makes one of us. So so The Gap and the
Okay.
Gain, or as someone, I won't say who, but they're into llamas, renamed it. Was it the gripe? The groan. All right. So let's go ahead and share my screen.
The grip.
Yeah.
The
Let me go ahead and fire up Kindle. We're going to share my screen. Catherine's here. I'm sure Catherine got some nuggets. Not sure what nuggets of what, but she got some nuggets. Where is this book, The Gap and the Gain? But it actually says that I have to re-download it, that it broke.
Did
My
you
Kindle-
delete it?
my
Well, there
Kindle
goes the
file-
pursuit of happiness.
This particular book, the Kindle file broke. I had to re-download. Okay, great. Here it is. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And look, the purpose of these sessions is not for us to sit around and agree with each other. It's to get perspective and to share ideas. So just to bring Glenn up to speed and anybody else who might be seeing this on YouTube, the premise of the book is that there's a gap and then there's the gain. And it says here, written by Dan Sullivan. It wasn't written by Dan Sullivan, with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. It was basically written by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, but he wanted to get on a bestseller list, so he put Dan Sullivan's name on there. A lot of people know Dan Sullivan as the founder of Strategic Coach. The premise of the book, participants can now see your application. Is this all working? Are we, yeah?
Yeah, we can see it.
So Virginia's here. Hi, Virginia. So the premise of the book is that you can either measure your success against some unachievable ideal and therefore be in the gap between where you're at and where you want to be, which is an ever moving target, and you're never quite happy and whatever. Or you can be in the gain, which is measuring your success from where you've been. So, there's that saying, hindsight is 20/20. So we can actually quantify, and we can see, if we're willing to look, that hey, we've made gains. Certainly that's true in my life and everyone's life, right? I mean, assuming you're looking. And that the idea here is that you can get out of the gap and get into the gain. So the first part of the book, we got through, all the different aspects of being in the gap and the anxiety that comes with that, and the falling short or feeling like you are. And then getting into the gain is just the flip side of the coin. So there are a couple of things that I outlined, or I highlighted here in the book. He gave a couple of interesting quotes from other people, but he gives examples about, in this case, with this 6th chapter, he gives an example about a guy who lost $2 million before his morning coffee, which is pretty heart-wrenching, right? And yet this guy found a learning experience out of it. And I know Bob, a couple of weeks ago, talked about how, I think it was Bob, talked about how, the essence of it is learn from your mistakes and, all that, right? So it's a pretty simple premise, and yet we got a whole book out of it, where Benjamin did. But there's something I highlighted here that I thought was notable, and that is that the gap takes away your agency as a person and makes you psychologically rigid. Interesting, this came up earlier today before I had read this chapter. I read this chapter this afternoon. But we talked about rigidity or flexibility in having reach. In other words, being in my little box or having a bigger box or being out of the box, right? Having a bit more extroversion and attention that I can use to observe and perceive opportunities and what have you, and not being so damn rigid, which I've been a lot in my life. I've been rigid. Today was a weird day for me. I'll tell you what, just looking at how my day went, I had today was the day where I announced and pulled the trigger on my withdrawal from certain aspects of my consulting work to make room for other things that I want to accomplish, right? So there's nothing weird about that, but you can only say yes to so many things, right? There's got to be some boundaries. I think it was even quoted in this book that if you have more than 3 priorities, well, you have no priorities. Interesting. Okay, so I was looking at that. Out of all the business things that I do, right, am I rigidly attached? Now, I tend to hang on to stuff. And so maybe this is a corollary that you guys can use. If you tend to be not necessarily a hoarder, like, physically hanging on to stuff, although that's a possibility too. But this rigidity speaks to me as something that I have to hang on to. I'm rigid, attached. I'm attached, right? So this is where we're always trying to live up to some unachievable ideal, whereas the gain increases your agency. Your agency, it's an interesting use of words, and makes you increasingly psychologically flexible. So he's giving here the contrast. And I think if you got nothing else out of this chapter but these 2 sentences, that would probably be a great summation. But he goes on, gives you some attributes here that you can look at, like what it's like to be in the gain or in the gap. In this case, he keeps going back to the gap, even though he's talking about being in the gain, keeps going back to the gap. You get to be anxious and depressed and all this. All right. So the more psychologically flexible you are, the less anxious and depressed you will be. Well, that's good. Now, this guy is a psychology major. And one thing that, having studied psychology myself quite a bit, not from an academic perspective, but from a life workability perspective, one of the things that seems to be agreeable to psychologists is that the more you feel like you have causation and dominion over your life, the more peace of mind you'll experience. And I think another way of saying that is the more psychologically flexible you are, in other words, cause over your own thinking, the less anxious and depressed you will be, obviously, right? So being able to choose the right thoughts, which we've talked about many times. He goes on, being psychologically flexible means you can move forward through uncertainty. Bam. So back to the idea of being rigid. Rigid with what? With what I know. Clinging on to stuff. I tend to hold on to stuff, right? Rigidly. Does that give me space to then, go where no man has gone before? Or is it no one has gone before? What's the correct quote, Glenn? To boldly go where no one.
Man.
I think it was man, Gene Roddenberry, the original. Okay. Even though there were women on the crew, we get it. Okay. But mankind. Okay. I got it. All right, good. What else? Also in this chapter, the more flexible you are as a person, the more willing you'll be to try multiple approaches to getting where you want to go. So here's talking about being rigidly attached to these methods. These are my methods and they must work and it has to be this way. Well, we've all seen where that goes, right? I think we have. The more rigid you are, the more dogmatically, I like that word, you'll try forcing the same approach even when it proves unsuccessful. That's where I'll differ a little bit right, the more tendency I'll have to force a solution. But assuming we've got an IQ to go with our rigidity, we'll also, force ourselves to do other methods as well. But still, do we want this to be a forced thing, or is it an easy flowing experience? When we are recognizing the gains that we've made, does that not boost our confidence to then go ahead and have a bit of space, a bit of flexibility? It makes perfect sense. So there's that. And with that, I think, one more thing. To apply the experience, this is interesting. To apply the experience transformer, pull out your journal and follow these instructions. So here he's giving us an opportunity to take inventory. So we're recapitulating, or we're having another look at some event in the past, whether pleasing or not. Think about any specific experience, positive or negative. Ask yourself, what about this experience worked? So if there's something wrong with it, there's got to be something right with it. All right, so something worked. What usefulness can you get from this experience to improve your future? Where's the lesson? Very simple. What can you learn from this experience about what you don't want? Now we get clarity through contrast, right? If we could say, I don't want that, well, what would be the opposite of that? This is something that my friend Michael Logier talked about. He wrote the book, The Law of Attraction, did some events with him. And he talked about clarity through contrast. It's easy to take inventory. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. Okay, great. So write that out. And then on the other side of the page, write what is the opposite of that? So now you've got some clarity, right? If we've been thinking negatively, now we know what to think positively, right? Look at that thing. Knowing what you know now, because you have had this experience, how would you approach your future differently? Great. Again, what did you learn? And then what about this experience are you grateful for? I'm glad that he came back to that, because truly this is, I think, the essence of living in the game, is being grateful for what you have accomplished, what you have attained, what you have become. Trauma, I thought this was interesting. Trauma, I think of trauma, I think of, shock. Well, it says here, trauma happens when your expectations are violated. He goes on, such that you lose your sense of meaning for life and worth as a person. That sounds a bit extreme. And he cites the other psychologist guy who writes things like that. But still, I could see like a physical trauma, right? There's a shock to the, I expected to move my hand through the air freely, and yet the obstruction, the obstacle impacted and caused trauma. Okay, so I was expecting to move swiftly and effortlessly towards some outcome, and my expectation was violated. So we could call this a psychological trauma. I thought that was an interesting thing that he brought up there. Also says here, the past is nothing more than the meaning you ascribe to it. Okay, not exactly. Okay, but we add meaning all the time. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, talked about how we're constantly adding meaning to stuff. Now, there is the experience of your past. And then in addition to that is the meanings. And I think, here's what I think anyway, all of my stories and suffering and all that about what it all means, that's where I get stuck. Okay. But we've talked many times in this group about just looking objectively, just observing and being as objective as we can. And that's, a conscious effort to do that. But just considering how much we tend to add meaning to stuff. And if we recognize it, we can release some of that. They can honestly say that they're grateful for the lessons they learned from them. I'm talking about people who live in the game. And I think with that, I got through this chapter. Yep. Who's got some thoughts on chapter 6? And then we'll get into the conclusion of the book. Chapter 6. Glenn.
Well, I haven't actually, I was reading along, and I actually just quick downloaded the book and kind of skimmed that chapter 6. It reminds me of something that I've heard, and I'm learning through some studies in neurolinguistic programming. You were saying the past is our experience of it, or words to that effect, says that, let me go back and look at it. I was just reminded of something that I read. Where was it? Supremely grateful for their experiences. Oh, so this was the thing. Says revise your life narrative in a positive way as a result. What I'd heard from the NLP readings, what happens, and this has become vitally important for me in my own review of my past experiences, my own life. What really matters is not what happened, although the facts of what happened remain the same. What really matters in terms of my growth and progress is not what happened. What matters is the story that I tell myself about what happened. And at any point, and this is the key nugget of NLP principle, neuro-linguistic programming principle, the key component for me is that at any time I bloody well please, I get to change. I have the opportunity, the choice to change and rewrite the story that I tell myself about what happened in my past. I mean, I won't go into any examples right now, but I could tell you about one experience that I had, for example, when I was living in the Middle East, and I could tell you two entirely distinct stories about that experience, such that they're both, air fingers quotes, factually true for me. The difference is which story empowers my memory of that experience. It cleanses my memory of that experience and empowers me to move forward in a positive way. So, and people say, well, I can't help it. Look at what you don't know what I've been through. So tell yourself a different story about what you've been through and empower yourself. And I point the fingers at Glenn. Empower myself to learn a different lesson, to learn an enriching, enhancing, empowering lesson about what happened, which I can use to move forward in a positive way and begin to achieve the outcomes that I desire. It's all up in here.
Yeah.
Back to you, John.
Thank you, Glenn. So you're demonstrating mental flexibility, not so rigid with this is what it's supposed to mean because, that was just like it was the other time. Having that ability to assess and constant revision. This is a principle that Neville talked about, right? So there's that. This comes up from multiple different angles. Again, I think that a lot of us get stuck in the meanings of stuff rather than consciously and deliberately reassessing what could that mean? What would I like it to mean? So the guy who lost $2 million that morning, I mean, that really sucks. Okay. And look, we've all had wins and losses. I think a lot of times when people, I don't know. What do you guys think? Do people actually learn? This is something that I've asked again and again. He gave the Einstein quote here where he said, insanity, repeating the same mistake, expecting different results. And who hasn't? But when we are willing to release some of the meaning, or I would say, in fact, I did say in my book, my own best thinking, my most cherished beliefs, which instruct, what I think stuff means. If I've got the chutzpah to forsake that or abandon that and say, you know what, I'm going to release that is not proving workable, right? I mean, I could be right and sit here and assert my rightness about what it all means, or I can learn something. And I've never learned anything by being right. So let's hit the reset button to the best of my ability, and let's just look. I think if we could do that, that pretty much sums up what we're talking about here. Virginia Pepitone, the cookie queen. Hello, Virginia. How's my friend?
Yeah, and I'm flying home to Denver this weekend, and I've got a label. That's just Friday night and coming back Sunday late. her
Mhm.
granddaughter's birthday and an opera that I booked a year ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
I got a label, like 58 cookie books, and package them and then put in a revision that I found that I left out a step and get them shipped to Amazon because they're out of stock at my end, which means Amazon's just selling.
And did
they're
you have to
preprint.
redo the Kindle version as well with the revision?
The Kindle, well, no, it's the same. So if it's wrong in one, it's wrong in both.
Oh, I see. It's one
There was a
file. for
step
both.
that I left out of,
Oh.
like, beat the egg whites before you put them into the cookie mix.
Well, of course, Virginia. How could you have left the egg white beating out? I mean, it's one of my
I
favorite
know.
parts of the
I
recipe.
know. I'm like, come on, how did I leave that step out?
Beat
All
it.
right. So
You gotta beat it.
anyway,
All right.
looking at, I did get the book. You know, I've been listening to the Audible,
Mhm.
and what's interesting is in the book, which I finally ordered because I wanted to be able to highlight it and all,
Oh, good.
you don't have the benefit of the conversations that take place at the end of every chapter between Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Because on the Audible, they banter for like 15, 20 minutes or something about everything that's just been discussed in that chapter and different aspects and different experiences. So I thought that was interesting. But just looking at the book, taking ownership of your experiences. When you're in the game, you're proactive about your experiences. You look at your experiences and utilize them to become more adaptive and successful in your future, which is now segueing from what Glenn said. When you're in the gap, you're reactive. And I have, as maybe many of us have been through our lives, we look at them, we're frustrated about what happened, and we choose to frame them as negative, a crummy thing that happened to us. Further down, it talks about the gain increases your agency, makes you psychologically flexible, and you manage your emotions, you don't manage you. But what I thought was interesting too is when you're in the game, you're more psychologically flexible. You take every experience life makes it difficult, easy, scary, exciting, challenging, accelerating, and you make it better. You're either a winner or a learner. He doesn't say loser. So I thought that was how, you know, you don't think of yourself as winning or losing. You're winning or you're learning, hopefully from that experience, what you want to do differently and how you want to put a Spin City Michael Jackson on that, or Michael J. Fox, Spin City on that. How can we spin that into a positive thing is what I meant to say. So that I like that when you're flexible, you're ready to make multiple approaches and not to compare yourselves to somebody else. Look at so many people on Facebook in the past, it bothered me. They were always on vacation. They were always having this fabulous life. They were always doing something wonderful. And I was like, don't you ever work? Don't you ever have something not go right in your life? So kind of gotten over that because now I'm having all these fabulous experiences myself. And I hope that that's not rubbing anybody else wrong. But this really helped me from the standpoint of staying in the game. What can I learn? How can I turn that into a good positive? And also measuring backwards. You know, that's just priceless to me of where have we actually come this far and not measuring against where we thought we would be, you know, where we expected to be, or how we're like down on ourselves because we haven't gotten there yet, you know. Oh, no, look up. So those two things is what made me just really love this book on there.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virginia. Good times. Anybody else on chapter 6? And I put a Michael Jackson Beat It gif in the chat.
I see what you did there, John.
There you go. Hey,
I
Stuart.
see what you did there.
I saw that too, man. That was the beginning of the end for Eddie Van Halen. Like most of this book, like the rest of this book, there's a lot of gold in this chapter. And then there were some cringy things for me. So I'll kind of roll through some of this. What I thought was interesting about the story of the guy who lost $1 million before coffee, or $2 million before coffee. And then first of all, what he didn't make note of was that the way he framed it at first was, this was the worst day in the market since the Great Depression. And then he kind of corrected himself and he was like, no, this is the worst day for me. because not everybody lost money, right? And it's how you position yourself. And so an understanding of, let's say, the principles of rhythm, and the tides come in and the tides go out, and just understanding that there's a seasonality to things, and maybe that there were people that did very well, during that crash and other crashes. And then the concept that, he called his broker and they said they had systems in place to handle, different situations, but that it was sort of a generalized one size fits all kind of deal to do okay in most situations, right? And that's an interesting concept in and of itself, where then what he really wanted to try and do was create different systems that did more than okay in every situation. And the challenge was just identifying when the tides changed or when the situation changes and which metrics or which system to apply. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I think that's relevant and pertinent to all of us as entrepreneurs, right? Then he says, a lot of these things are just absolutely resonate with me. We create value and meaning in every experience. And like Glenn was talking about, this is all based on our worldview, on our perspective, how we think about things, how we see the world. And I think that, that depending on how we see things, right? Just like you were saying, Glenn, this immediately brings up the Stoic concept of catalepsis and impressions and how we interpret things, right? And that shit happens to everybody. It's just how you deal with it. And maybe Epictetus didn't quite say it that way. But to me, that's the concept, right? It's not the events in your life. It's your response to them or the meaning that we assign to things. Glenn, what you got, man?
Well, I don't mean to interrupt anybody. If someone else had a thought, I've already spoken, so. All right.
I tend to go on, so this is a conversation.
No worries. I think I just read what it seems to me would be the objectionable portion of the conclusion chapter regarding Thomas Jefferson and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Is that what brought up that little difference of artistic vision?
No, I didn't even get to the conclusion yet in terms of.
Oh, okay. No, please go ahead. This is why I didn't want to say anything yet. Go ahead and finish.
No. But actually, that's how we opened the book, because the first chapter is very much the same thing, where he drops some serious criticism on Thomas Jefferson, and yeah, I have some thoughts about his conclusion as well. But
by all means, I'm all ears.
I'm gonna just keep rolling. He's talking about through this. One of the things that stuck out to me, everything happens for you and not to you, right? So again, right, it's about how we perceive things. If you have a victim mentality, we were talking about this morning, John, right, during general session, that a lot of people go through life feeling like life just happens to them and that they have no control over the circumstances or responsibility for the circumstances in their lives, which I think kind of leads to this, the other thing that he was talking about psychological flexibility. And if you're not flexible, then you have more of a tendency to have anxiety and depression and not perform well and have pathology and get into substance abuse and have a low quality of life. Vocabulary word for this chapter, Alexithymia. Did you catch that? So he says that if you're psychologically inflexible, you have a tendency to get alexithymia, which means that you can't identify or be in touch with your emotions. So I thought that was interesting. And that we have control over the meaning of, or let's say the meaning we assign to our experiences. He was saying that we have control of the meaning of our experiences, but I think that just to me, by adding the words that we assign to, right, means that we have something to do with that we choose how we interpret the events in our life. And both Virginia and John were talking about the part where he was talking about the third door. And I really found that fascinating because as someone who prides myself on being a creative problem solver and trying multiple approaches, right? So he talks about this book called The Third Door, and he makes kind of a nightclub analogy. And he says the door number one is the main entrance, and that's the door that everybody goes in and out of. And that's the door that 99% of the people use. Door number two is the VIP entrance that the billionaires and the celebrities and all the highfalutin people will use. And then he said there's always a third door. And I would argue that, you know, that there's an infinite number of doors, but you could put that all in the third door, right? And it's the concept of you sneak around the back and, you know, you bang on the back door until somebody opens, or you find a window that you know, call, or you climb in, or whatever it is, right? I mean, I remember as a kid during my you know, angsty, debaucherous, youthful days, you know, of having somebody, you know, go to the back of the movie theater and open the door for us or whatever, you know. So whatever it is, that applied to me, or resonated with me. The secret door, the door that you have to make yourself. You pull out the Sawzall or whatever, and you make your own freaking door, you know. And that's the way I like to look at life. And I think that just is indicative of persistence and grit and determination. And then he gets into this thing about the peaks and the valleys. And I don't know if you caught this, but I started thinking like, oh, this is where he got The Gap in the Gain from, was this previous book that he read about the peaks and the valleys. And this is where I start to take some issue. And if you know, Glenn, if you take a peek at this, you might agree with me. But he says that the good things in our lives happen to us because of what we do in the valleys, meaning that there's peaks and there's valleys, right? And the good experiences are the peaks, and the valleys are the challenging or the negative experiences. But again, if we assign value to these things, well, then that's all arbitrary anyway, because it's all based on your perspective. But what he's saying, or what he said, was good things happen because of what you do in the valleys. And I think that's a correlation does not equal causation kind of thing. I think that there's a relationship between how we act and react and interpret the challenging times, right? What, you know, you don't know loss unless you have had. You don't know sorrow unless you know joy, right? I think there's a relationship there, but I have a hard time accepting that the good things in my life happen as a result of what happens during the bad times. I don't know if anybody else caught that, but it was a little cringy to me. I felt like there is a relationship between the peaks and the valleys, right? And again, I think it's about how we interpret those experiences, but I can absolutely not say that the good things in my life happen because of the bad things in my life. Like, I just couldn't get there, but I got it. And then he talks about the child that was injured in the car accident, and that, you know, during tragedy, a lot of people tend to do the powerless, helpless victim. Why me? Why is God punishing me? Why did this happen to me? And then he says something interesting. He says, well, looking for meaning is fruitless and pointless and doesn't do anything. And again, I take issue with that, because I think even as hard as it is to lose a child or to have the most horrible things that you could imagine happen in your life, I still think that there's meaning to be found in that. And I think, to me, I try to look for meaning in every experience, whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience or whatever value I assign to that. And to me, it's about what's, let's say for less traumatic experiences, I would say, well, what's the lesson in it for me? What is the universe trying to show me? Or what is, you know, how can I better myself because of this experience? And I don't want to devalue anybody's experience that has had great trauma or great loss, right? I'm not trying to be insensitive. by saying that. But I think that even in the greatest of traumas, there's opportunity for growth, right? And I think that at the end of that, the parents that lost a child came out of it saying, well, we're going to be better and stronger because of it or whatever. So anyway, there was a little bit of a contradiction there. Then he drops a cool Orwell quote about who controls the past, who controls the future from 1984. So I thought that was interesting because I think that not only is that pertinent in the context of the book, but I think it's totally relevant in terms of what's going on in the world today and trying to control the narrative and trying to erase the past and revising history and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then this experience transformer thing, did you catch that it was a trademarked experience, a trademarked thing? So it's a trademarked thought process, experience transformer, ding, TM, right? And I'm like, this is like Stoicism 101. It's like personal transformation 101. You have a shitty experience or whatever. You look at it, you examine it, you figure out, how can I make this better? And it was a little bit offensive to me that somebody tried to like put their name on that or try to own this personal human transformative process that we all tend to go through. So I don't know, that was just me. Then he gets into proactive gratitude. I thought that was very cool because that really applies to what we were talking about this morning. Missy, right? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Be thankful for the thing before you even have it. And then you have much more of a tendency to attract that experience or that opportunity into your life, right? Assuming the state of the wish fulfilled, living from the end, working from the end, right? To me, that's all this proactive gratitude. It's one thing to be thankful after the fact. It's another thing to be thankful and be grateful for what you have and be thankful before the thing even happens. So I thought that was very cool. Then he talks about this deliberate rumination. And as a camelid herder, right, as a llama guy, as a yamero, right, as soon as somebody says rumination, I'm like, oh, cool, I can relate to that. But this concept of you think about an experience, you assign meaning to it, and then you revise that experience, right? That's my code for the pruning shears of revision a la Goddard, right? But I again, a lot of gold in here, some stuff that I'm like, I'm not so cool with. And then I'm not even getting into the conclusion yet. Oh, and then he says this other thing about the more challenges you go through and you overcome in your life, and the more time you spend in the gain, you become anti-fragile. Did you catch that? Anybody? I thought that was pretty cool. Like, you're weathering yourself. You're preparing yourself for the next challenges, and in theory, you're less traumatized by the next experience. Rock and roll.
So anti-fragile, wouldn't that just be resilient? I mean, that's the word that came up from, so I don't know, I guess anti-fragile.
Who says that?
Trademark, right? Anti-fragile. Okay, cool.
Ding.
So ding. Bob Missy. We got an intimate crowd here today. No need to raise hands. Just come on out like you own the place.
Well, I don't like to interrupt Stuart as he is sharing his ruminations with us. However, I believe I believe that the issue that he was bringing up when I raised my hand had to do with assigning meaning. And you can't really assign meaning validly, I felt, when you're in the middle of the experience or even shortly after the experience. At some point, you do have to assign meaning to it, but you're going to exaggerate it more than likely the closer you are to the experience. You're going to exaggerate that meaning, and that's where the danger lies. And it's a hard thing to get rid of. Once you've assigned that meaning, once you've given it a value, all right, and you're looking back and, we are all rather stubborn. We have our preconceptions that we carry with us. Then you're not going to assign the proper value to it because you already assigned the value to it. You have not let time and nature take its course. That was the one thing I just wanted to throw out there, because I don't think he was necessarily wrong in his statement. So,
You just brought up something for me, and I actually trembled to even say this, but part of the reason I am where I am, I think, is because from some trauma that I went through, not assigning meaning to it at all. Just that didn't happen. I'm going to ignore that. And you cannot do that. It will follow you until you put it in its proper place and give it its proper meaning. And it's only coming here to these mastermind groups you would think I'd know. I'm not really, I ain't dumb like Lena Lamont said in Singing in the Rain. But
or Fredo.
I'm smart. Yeah. But sometimes you just can't face things. That's all it was. And I had a long gap period. And so, yeah, but if you don't assign it, it might get assigned for you. So you better take control and give it the proper meaning, like Bob said, with a little bit of distance. And it no longer has you. Otherwise, it keeps you in its grip. And you think you're running from it, but you're in its constant grip. So it took me a long while to figure that out, mostly with the help of this man and this group and these people and that guy over there, the one that sits in the middle. But yeah, you better be careful. So assign it, and you can reassign it. And we know that now, you can revise it. You can literally change history. Was it last week? Stuart said by giving it new meaning today, or the author said by giving it a new meaning today, or you can just go back and rip it right at the root, like it never happened. You really can, because it's only up here that counts. And you will change your future by going back to another present. And then where you are here now, it's so complicated. I could have come out of my skull any minute. Remember that other book?
Yeah.
I might give birth to myself right now.
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point, Missy, is that you're not going to solve a problem by avoiding or denying it, or, what you resist persists and all that. But I'm surprised you didn't name Neville tonight, because he talked about revision, right?
I am naming him every time I speak.
There you go. Okay, so Neville, and now we got to hear from Neville.
Hey, John, a couple things occur to me. But first of all, there's this thing I have to say. Virginia, you talked about people, these perfect lives. I can tell you with a fair degree of confidence that of the people who post their idyllic lives and experiences on social media, I would estimate that approximately 0% of those cases are those people's actual lives, exactly like what they post on social media. Nobody but nobody posts the shit. All they post is the beer and Skittles, the glitz and glamour, the sparkles and unicorns. Look how wonderful my life is. DM me for more info. That's what they're doing. Virtually all of them. But I just threw that in for free. And I don't feel...
There's also the people that want to tell you all their problems and look, I broke my leg and look at the pictures and I'm in the hospital. I mean, there's that too, right?
Yeah, I heard a quote. You're right, John. I heard a quote a few years ago from a man named Tom Herman, who at one time was the head football coach down here at the University of Texas. I love this quote. 4 words. Nobody cares. Work harder. So then there's that. Or as I like to say, man, don't nobody want to hear about your problems? Seriously.
You got time for that?
Don't you know I got time for that? So the other thing, I have a reaction, and this may be a bit of a devil's advocate sort of thing, because I feel only a limited qualification to speak on this book, not having read the whole thing. But I'm looking at the conclusion. I didn't go back to the beginning. The criticisms that I've heard of this author's opinion of Thomas Jefferson, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I read what he said, at least in the conclusion of the book, I really feel compelled now to go back and read the whole book, by the way. So it's good that I came in here tonight, because the opinions, the things that people have shared are now motivating me. I need to go back and, do this book from the beginning and go through. Anyway, he says Jefferson was wrong in measuring his happiness against his ideals. When you're pursuing happiness and you're measuring yourself against whatever you're pursuing, blah, blah, blah. The happiness is not something you pursue. Okay, I can dig that, what he says. Happiness is the result of a decision, in my opinion. Happiness is the result of a choice. I can get up in the morning, I can decide to be miserable, or I can decide to be happy. Fair enough. What he's talking about, though, when I hear the original writing, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I'm reminded of a person. I'm reminded of a particular person. And that is my sainted mother, Eleanor Henderson, who is the happiest, the most spiritual, the most godly, and the most personally magnetic person I know. I've not met a single human soul in my life who has met my mother who doesn't absolutely love my mama, adore her. I think part of that is, her spiritual walk and the way she exudes godliness and exudes the sweet savor of a life of God. But that's one other thing. I think a huge part of what makes my mother a force of nature is the fact that she is always working on something. She's always got a project. She's always got a thing she's doing. My younger sister, who's a pastor in Charlotte, where Mama lived, they're always working and doing women's groups and women's workshops. And my mother is contributing to a book right now, and she was just asked to give some remarks at a big seminar and all this sorts of thing. And talking, she just got back from a 3-week trip around up in New York, visiting, seeing friends and family, and she was actually asked to give the keynote address at the installation of the new pastor of a major church in New York. Did I mention my mama's a force of nature? She's always got something to look forward to, always working on something new, always thinking about the horizon, always pursuing something. In this case, I'm not going to say that this author is wrong. I'm going to say that in this case, I vehemently disagree with his assessment of the Jefferson statement, because, as the old preacher used to say, I ain't where I want to be, and I ain't where I'm going to be, but thank God I ain't where I was. And that's my mama. And that, to me, in my opinion, is the life statement of any person who is constantly seeking improvement, constantly seeking growth, constantly seeking both to experience and to give, Reverend Lavinia, the impression of increase to everyone around. And so I would say that, one of my highest goals in life, one of my, what's the word? One of my values, one of my personal life values is to be right in the middle of working on something at the moment my number is called. You see? Right in the middle of a new project. Oh, okay, time for me to go? Okay, guys, carry on without me. See you later. And off I go. Right? So, life, liberty, there must be, in my opinion, life must entail a pursuit of something larger, something greater than ourselves. Earl Nightingale referred to it as, was it Earl Nightingale? Maybe quoting Jim. Anyway, creative, constructive discontent. Right? I'm in pretty good shape now, but you know what? There's something else. There's something else I'm looking for. And that, to me, is the essence of the pursuit of happiness. Okay, shut up, Glenn.
Thank you, Glenn. That was awesome. Good times. Yeah, I don't think we need to get into semantics, although the author does. Virginia, you've got a hot mic.
Yeah, I just want to address this Jefferson thing one time because I think y'all are missing the point. I don't know, but we need to take the words "the pursuit of" out. So Jefferson should have said life, liberty, and happiness, but he didn't. He didn't say the pursuit of life. He purposely didn't say the pursuit of liberty. He only said the pursuit of happiness. So I think that's the whole gist here, is that he chose to put that in front of happiness and not in front of life and liberty. You know, because you can't guarantee anybody happiness. And at this point, you really can't guarantee anybody liberty or life for that matter. But, and Glenn, when you go back in the beginning, you'll look at some of the writings that they quote about Jefferson at 20 years old or something, how he felt that man really couldn't achieve happiness anyway.
Oh
So
my God.
that's just my whole thing, is that he didn't put it in front of the other two words. He only put it in front of the word happiness.
I hope to high heaven nobody ever goes back and reviews something that I wrote when my dumb ass was 20 years old. Please.
Well, that's kind of, that's part of what he was like unhappy about. And he felt like man could not achieve happiness. It wasn't meant for us to get it. We could only pursue it. So anyway, that's the only thing, is I don't put that much. When I first read the book, I first heard it, I was like, oh my God, he's criticizing Thomas Jefferson. Really? Oh my gosh. But then when I look at it simply, is that, he chose not to say anything about pursuing life or pursuing liberty. He said that you're entitled to that, but you're not entitled to happiness. You're only entitled to pursue it. So anyway, I just try to keep it simple.
Virginia, you're going into his mind, and that's not what it was, because he was originally
I'm just going to do how the words are printed, how the words are written,
he was originally
So
going
that's how
to
I wrote it.
life, liberty, but you're saying he chose to put in, it was going to be life, liberty, and property. And that's what he should have left, because this was about, political things, but he's florid and he's brilliant, and he
I'm not saying he's not.
I didn't really.
the pursuit of happiness. What is wrong with it? Look at John. Don't laugh at that.
No, there's nothing wrong with pursuing it. I thought that the perception amongst those who have been in this study the whole past weeks was that we weren't supposed to be pursuing happiness. We were supposed to just be having happiness on there.
Well,
So
he didn't speak to Neville Goddard.
I really hear you. I'm sorry.
He didn't speak to Neville Goddard. He didn't have those understandings at that time.
I know. Yes, he would have been enlightened. He sure would have.
I think he was pretty enlightened. He was on the wrong side a few years later, but
I'm going on mute.
You gotta
That's
watch
it.
me and the
You can-
founders. I'm just so, it would be like insulting Captain Kirk. I'm going to stand up for him. And his
Stuart, you
ideas-
put your hand up a second ago.
I wanna jump in. I put it in the chat too. Life and liberty are God-given rights, whereas happiness is a choice. And if you want to pursue misery, that's your choice. But I think, it's interesting, the concept of pursuit, because again, it wasn't his original verbiage. And I know that some of us are vehemently offended or in a defensive mode of Jefferson, which may, be some of our heroes or things like that. Other people may be, defending the author and things like that. And I think this whole conversation is fascinating. But what I thought was interesting is that he flat out says that that Jefferson was wrong to measure happiness against his ideals. And so to me, I don't think he ever really said that. So I think he's sort of like putting words in the mouth of kind of thing. because says who that Jefferson was saying that we need to measure happiness against our ideals, right? I think I agree with Glenn in terms of if you're not striving towards something, then what are you doing on this planet, kind of thing. To me, the term pursuit doesn't imply that happiness is unattainable, right? I mean, is what the author saying is that ideals are a bad thing? Should we just not have ideals to strive towards? Because then what he says in this final chapter, which was another one of these cringy moments for me, was trying to achieve a goal always puts us in the gap. Right? And again, I vehemently, strongly disagree. And I get, as a person who considers myself an idealist, there's almost this unwritten understanding, this contract with self, that if you're an idealist, you know, that you hold principles, that you hold these things as intangibles, if you would, to strive towards, and that you may never, right? I think, Glenn, you did a whole thing on perfection, right? Bring it, baby.
Chapter 6, the first duty. If I may express my cynical New York brain for just a second, I'm sensing, reading this conclusion, I'm sensing a little bit of book sales strategy going on here. I think, and I could be wrong, and again, I'll preface it, this is my personal opinion. I think that some of what this author's throwing in here is intended to spark lively conversations like the one we're having right now, and to motivate mofos like me to say, hey, you know what? I need to go back and buy this book and read it. I honestly don't think this guy hates Thomas Jefferson. And you're right, Stuart. Trying to achieve an ideal always puts you in the gap. Well, maybe I need to go back and read the first part of the book and find out how he defines this term gap. I assume it's an acrostic for something. Please don't spoiler alert it for me, if that's the case. But it just feels to me a little bit like John's like, yeah, I think Glenn actually got it. So the thing that I picked up so far, in what admittedly little I've actually read of this actual book, my number one takeaway right now is the confirmation of the old saying that one sign of emotional maturity is the ability to live with uncertainty, the ability to continue to operate and move forward in the pursuit of our goals when we don't know what's around the corner. And flexibility, talks about psychological flexibility, having the ability to look at an experience, in this case he's talking mostly about negative experiences, non-pleasing, even when I'm in the middle of it, and being able to glean some type of helpful meaning out of it. That is enormously... John, one of the first things I heard you say when we started these mastermind conversations, those many years ago, one of the things I heard you say was that whenever a negative, or what appears to be a negative or a hurtful experience comes your way, one of the first thoughts that comes to your mind is what? What an opportunity. What an opportunity. Even in, God help me, sometimes even in the death of someone we care about, or in the death of a relationship, in the death of a career, in the death of a life situation, every calamity, I forget what the exact words is, every defeat or every calamity carries within it the seeds of an equal or greater benefit. We may, with our limited thinking, not be able to see it right now. And the challenge for me and for each of us, it seems to me, is to seek above all else the ability to see through the clouds, to seek wisdom. I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that phrase. Sorry, John. Anyway, I don't want to give anything away. But to seek the ability to see through the cloud to the sunshine. Not to the silver lining, to see all the way through to the sun shining on the other side of the cloud. And boy, that takes more strength than I think I may currently have at this moment. Like right in the middle of the disaster. What an opportunity. Whew, how strong would I have to be emotionally to be able to instinctively react that way and be seeking the opportunity in the middle of calamity?
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, everyone. And with that, we conclude The Gap and the Game.
This is my round of applause.
All right. All right. Here's what's next. Here's what's next, guys. Get ready for this. The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews. I haven't read this book in probably 6 years or so. I've done a couple of events with Andy. He's written a few other books, which have also, this one's only got 3,875 five-star reviews. Glenn, you got through this book in one day because you couldn't put it down?
You said that you read this book maybe 6 years ago. I finished reading this book 6 hours ago.
There you go. So tune in next week for an interesting conversation. Let's get through the first couple chapters. If you're going to do the audiobook, Virginia or anybody else, somewhere in the first chapter or two, there's sound effects of a car crash. I'll just let you know, if you're driving, it sounds very realistic, I guess, depending on your sound system. I don't recommend doing the audiobook whilst driving, at least not the first couple chapters, okay? Because I just about crapped my pants. So there's that. Love you guys. And I did put a link to Ain't Nobody Got Time for That in the chat. So if you want to go have some fun, go watch that. I hear my wife and daughter just got back. I need a cut and color. Look at that. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We'll